Now notice this verse, Daniel chapter 4 and 30. It's the last verse that we come to. And this man wanted us to know something now. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar. Now remember, for 7 years, well, we'll get into that a little bit later. But this is his testimony. This is one of the things that we have that he wrote. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways judgment. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble. Here in Daniel, well, let me go to this first, and then we'll kind of take a look at it. First of all, his good. Well, he was the greatest king of Babylon. His work still exists today. Everything about Babylon was all about him. Name another king of Babylon. And of course, the guy who saw the handwriting on the wall. But can you remember his name right off the top of your head? Now, we'll get to him later, right? But you remember Nebuchadnezzar. Everybody, you see that old Nebu, and everybody knows it's Nebuchadnezzar. He is infinitely famous in this old world. Everybody knows about him. His structures are still there. His roads, still there. Those hanging gardens, still there. All of this stuff that says that he existed, that he was the greatest of Babylon's kings, still are there telling us that he was the greatest of Babylon's kings. He made sure, because like I said, you can't see a building, you can't look at a wall, you can't look at a temple, you can't look at anything in Babylon without seeing his name carved into the bricks. You know he existed. He wanted you to know not only did he exist, that there's a little bit of ringing in this thing, that he was the greatest of the Babylonian kings. He was, as far as he is concerned, he was Babylon. And he wanted you to know that. He was a builder of cities. This is important, because here's a guy who you just saw conquer the entire Middle East. Many of the cities, Damascus, the oldest continuous city in the world, in the Middle East. This man built cities that are still there today. This man went in, he not only destroyed, but he also built. And he built city after city after city, up and down the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers are evidences of his construction. And construction so good, they're still there. We can't keep the infrastructure of America. We built the Eisenhower freeways in the 50s and 60s, and they're crumbling. This guy built highways 600 years before Jesus. They're still driving on them. The tanks drove in on them when they went in. I mean, wow, what a builder this guy was. I mean, did you see the walls? When he built a wall, those walls were wide enough to race 12 chariots across. They're wider. The top of his walls are wider than this building that you're sitting in. That's a wall. I mean, if Trump wants to build a wall, he should go and ask this guy how to build a wall. He'll show him how to build a wall or two. Those walls, impenetrable for the most part, until God showed somebody how to get around the wall. But it took an act of God to overcome his wall. An act of God to overcome his walls. Protected his people throughout his life. Kept his civilization alive. In fact, the next kingdom that came on would build upon his progress. They would style themselves after him because he was so good at what he did. Why mess with something that's working? And I want you to notice this, the third thing about him. He was used by God. Now wait, hold on a second. You mean he was a holy man like Daniel? No. In fact, sometimes God uses people in spite of themselves. He was used to leave us a legacy. Did you read that note that he penned? He gave glory. Here's a man, well, let me not get to that because on my next page you'll see it. So we'll get to it. I just want you to stop for a moment and think, why would God use this guy? He went in and tore Jerusalem down to the ground. Left not a brick standing when he got through with it. He went down, he tore down the temple that Solomon built. Solomon's temple, he went and dismantled the whole thing. He went in and all of the stuff that they used in honoring God, all the forks and spoons and all the utensils that were used to worship God, he grabbed them all up and brought them back to his palace. All the gold and all of the shields and all of the monies and all of the things, the altars and everything that was used by the Jews in the temple, he confiscated it for himself. And said to them, I'm stronger than your God, because I just took all his stuff. You don't go into a man's house and steal his stuff unless you're stronger than that man. If somebody comes in and steals my stuff, they're only going to be able to steal my stuff and hurt my family if they first get rid of me. So they're going to have to be better than I am in order to get my stuff and hurt my family. Just has to go that way. And so he says, look what I just did. I just demolished your God's house, and I took everything your God owns, including his people. And I drug you all back as my prisoner, and he couldn't stop me. Wow. Yeah. God ain't done yet. How come? Well, what he didn't know is God was using him to do all that. It's kind of like what he said to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, you don't understand. I raised you up just so I could tear you down. So that everybody would know my power. The Jews tell the story of their deliverance from Egypt to prove the power that God has over this world. And now we got Nebuchadnezzar who is saying, listen, I beat your God. God said, wait, hold on a second. No, you didn't. But okay, go ahead, believe that for now. Believe it for now because I need you to do this. I need you to tear down my temple. I need you to take all of my worship stuff. I need you to take my people prisoner and drag them to Babylon. I need you to stop and pour salt over all the soil so they can't grow anything. I need you to wreak havoc in my nation. And I want you to do it for me. But I'm not telling you you're doing it for me. I'm going to let you think you're doing it for you. Here's a guy who's being used by God without knowing it. But here's a man, see, when you stop and think, people always tell you, I remember when I was going through Bible college, the preachers would always say to us that if you want God to use you, you got to be more powerful, more holy, more this, more that than anybody else. And I'm thinking to myself, he used him. He used him. Surely I can be this bad and get used by God. God will use who God wants to use when God wants to use him, and you can't change it. There is nothing I can do to make God use me. And there's nothing I can do to prevent God from using me. Because if God wants to use you, hey, what was Paul doing to get God to use him? Oh, I remember he was throwing Christians in jail. He was hauling people off to prison. He was standing there and giving people stones so they could kill Stephen. That's what he was doing. And God said, wow, look at that good man. I want to use him. You can't do anything to make God use you. And you can't do anything to keep God from using you either. God is sovereign. God is in control of all things all the time. And so I want you to see that in the fact that he used this man, who many people would say, wow, how could God possibly? The Jews said that all the time. How can you use this wicked man to punish us? And God said, because in my sight, you are more wicked than him. He's wicked because he doesn't know better. You have the truth and you're still wicked. Wow, what an indictment. Now, we haven't used this term, the bad, for a while because those prophets don't like to tell us too much bad about themselves. But this guy, Daniel's writing, so he doesn't mind telling us a little bit of bad about the king. So let's take a look at it. First of all, I think one of the things that makes him bad is he thought he was God. I just beat up your God and took his temple and took all of his stuff. I mean, I took all of his gold, all of his silver. I took his altar. You don't take God's altar, but I took it. Why? Because I am a bigger God than your God. It's kind of hard. Now, you notice number 2, but number 2 is because of number 1. If you are God, how can you not be proud? You look out, if you're God, and you look out at your creation. And when Jesus created, or God created, Jesus being the creator there according to Colossians, look at what he says in Genesis. When he says, I created the sun, the moon, the stars, and at the end of each day he says, and I looked, and it was, and I got to tell you, very good. And everything God creates, he stops for a moment. And he says, you see that grass in the field over there? I made that. And I got to tell you, it was very good. And then I made the fish in the sea and the birds in the air. And you want to know something about them fish and those birds? They're very good. And then I made the cattle in the field, and I made this and I made that. And I got to tell you, it was very good. God stops and reminds you that everything he did was very good. God has a right to be proud because he's God. And there's no sin in him. So you can't really use the term proud with God. But I'm just showing you that if you're God, you have the right to say, and it's very good. Now, Nebuchadnezzar thought he was God. Thought. And that's the difference. God knows he's God. God said, I looked all over heaven, and guess what? I'm the only one up here. There ain't another one like me. There ain't anybody out there creating universes. There isn't anybody out there in control of all things all the time. Nebuchadnezzar, you got to do that because I needed you to do that. You are my tool. You see my hand? You're in my hand. I'm not in yours. So it becomes very proud. And pride often leads to a fall. So God says to him one day, you know, I gave you this kingdom. You didn't create it. You didn't make it. It was mine, and I'm loaning it to you. I'm giving it to you, and I got to tell you, I'm going to take it back someday. And he gave him the dream about the golden head and the silver shoulders and the brass and the bronze and the legs and down to the toes of iron. And he showed him, I'm going to bring up 4 major kingdoms after you. You'll be the first. Then I'm going to bring in the Persians, and then I'm going to bring in the Greeks, and then I'm going to bring in the Romans, and then eventually I'm going to bring in the Antichrist. And he laid all this out to the king. Just to let you know, I'm using you. I'm using you. And remember that verse we read? That was the verse he remembered after God taught him. He had a tendency to forget what God taught him sometimes. He forgot that, remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Now, we haven't talked about them yet, but you probably remember the story. No one's allowed to pray except to the king, because he's God. There's 3 guys over here, and they don't want to fall down and worship your statue. And you said when the horn blows, everybody has to kneel down, and these guys refuse to. And so they're arrested, they're brought to the king, and they said to the king, yeah, we heard that order, but there is a God in heaven that we serve. Wait, you serve me? No, we don't. We serve a God in heaven who told us to serve you. Oh, no. He fired up the old furnace 7 times. Took the fellows, remember, he had his biggest and strongest men in his army grab these boys. And they open up the door to throw them in, and the soldiers are killed by the fire as they throw these boys in. And Nebuchadnezzar peeks through the window that he's got created. And he said, wait, did you throw 3 guys in? Yes. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Yeah. I see a 4th one. And that 4th guy, he looks like the Son of God. Get them, boys and men. And they come out, and there wasn't any effect of the flame on them. There wasn't even the smell of smoke. Nothing was singed. Absolutely nothing was changed. It is as though they had never been in the fire. And they said, remember we told you the God we serve? This is his kind of power. And the king realized, he couldn't protect anybody from fire. He couldn't protect himself from fire. Here's their God could protect them in the midst of this worst flame, this 7 times hotter furnace than ever. Their God walked with them in it. And not only could God walk in there, but anybody who walked with God was protected as well. Wow, what a God you serve. But then he forgets it. And then he goes on bragging about himself. He sometimes forgot. So what did God do to them? Well, God, some people say, gave him mental illness, to be kind. For 7 years, God said to Nebuchadnezzar, for 7 years, I'm going to drive you away from all your people. And you're going to go out into the field, and you're going to eat grass like the cattle. And your hair is going to grow, and you're going to slobber all. You're going to, listen, I'm going to, you think you're a God, but you're not. Let me show you what a God can do to somebody. Now, can you do this, Ken? Can you make people go crazy? No. But I can. So he takes him out of control of his own empire, sets him out for 7 years. For 7 years, the guy is like an animal, eating grass, howling at the moon. And his hair is growing longer and longer. His beard's bigger and bigger. Doesn't look at all like this. Well, he's out there walking around on all 4s. At the end of 7, see, God's in control. God said, you'll do it for 7 years. 7 years was over. Just like he said to the Jews, I'm going to take you for 70. At the end of 70, he let them come home. It's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. 40th day, stop raining. Actually, probably the 41st day. At the close of 7 years, guess what? He comes to his right mind. He's looking up toward heaven, and in his animal form, he realizes to himself, there is a God in heaven. And the moment he acknowledges that, because that was what God said, when you realize that I am who I am, I'll let you come back. And it takes him 7 years, but finally he's looking up. He realizes he is not a God, but that there is a God in heaven. And the Jews know about him. Daniel serves him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego serve that God who's in control of everything. And so he wrote that verse that you and I opened with, where he praised the God who lives in heaven. No longer himself. He realized, hey, guess what? I'm not as powerful as I thought. I was just a tool. And the most you and I can ever hope to be is a tool. Some of us are hammers. Some of us are chisels. Some of us are fine instruments of gold. Most of us, however, just need to be beat about like a hammer. We're about as dense anyway. But he tended to forget, but God taught him. And this is the thing, God can teach anybody God wants to teach. He taught him. A man who thought he was God taught him that he wasn't a God and that there is a God, and he worshiped the God of Daniel. Because there's only one. Now, what can we learn from this fellow? This is important. We chose him because he is not the best. We chose him, however, because there is a lesson we can learn from anybody's life. There's things you can even learn from mine. Each one of us in our life has something that we can share with people. There is a lesson in every life. In this particular man, we find these 3 things, or at least I find these 3 things, and I share them with you. First of all, Some serve God willingly, others are used unwittingly. I thought I was tearing down that temple. I didn't realize God was tearing down the temple and just having me do the manual labor. You can either serve God with a joyful heart, or you can serve God because He wants you to. I do what I do because God wants me to do it. Now, I can either enjoy it, or I can just do it because it's what God wants me to do. And this is what He's going to have me do. Whatever He wants, that's what He gets. Fortunately for me, I enjoy doing what He wants me to do. And so I'm one of those willing people up there. But others are unwitting. God will use anybody He wants, anytime He wants to accomplish whatever He wants them to do. And there are a lot of people right now who are accomplishing exactly what God wants accomplished, and they don't even know they're accomplishing it. Some of them will pay for it ultimately in hell. But it's what God wanted done. And God used them because they were willing to go there and didn't want to serve Him. There are others who will be redeemed and who will find it joyful and will forever have the testimony, I served God. Throughout all of heaven, I will be able to say to people, I served the Lord, and Him only did I serve. I served no other false gods. Like David, I could stand right next to David and say, hey David, I'm perfect just like you are. David said, please, what an easy target that is. All right, David, maybe I didn't do all the bad stuff you did. But like you, I was faithful to the Lord my whole life. And that was the standard that God set down, so I could claim that standard in heaven. I want to be a willing servant of God. I don't want to be made to do something. I want to do it because God wants it done, and like Isaiah, here my Lord, send me. And then the second thing that we need to learn, effectiveness is affected by counselors. The king, the leader, the king in this case, when he listened to Daniel, made very good decisions. When he listened to Daniel, he was very effective for God. On the other hand, he had other counselors who said to him, aren't you a king? Shouldn't you make that people a giant statue, make everybody bow down and worship you? Yeah, come to think of it, I am a God. And people should bow down and worship me. People should pray to me. Got him in trouble because God said, hey, it doesn't work that way, buddy. I am the God of heaven and nobody else. Therefore, do me a favor, would you? Take off your kingly apparel, drop your crown, and go out there and eat grass for 7 years. Because that's what I want you to do. What? God and God alone. See, effective leadership can be affected by our counselors. Remember when the kingdom divided, Rehoboam and Jeroboam? And Solomon's son he had old men who said to him, you know what? Your dad in his last days was piling on the taxes, and the people don't have bread to eat. You've got to cut taxes for them. And he said, you think my dad had high taxes? My little finger is going to be fatter than my daddy's thigh. And he raised the taxes, and the people revolted, and he lost the kingdom. Why? He had good counselors that said to him, you know, these people are tired of your dad. And they're tired of his taxes. And they're tired of his control. And they're tired of him eating steak and them having to eat beans. They're tired of it. So you really need to cut back on this. Now that you are the king, here's your opportunity to be kind to the people. And the people will fall behind you. The people will love you if you would only give them this break. Nope. And he lost it. See, our leadership is affected by our counsels. If you take bad counsel and make bad decisions, you'll be known as a lousy leader. Sometimes our worst counselors are ourselves. So we have to be careful. And then finally, our last point, pride can lead to a fall. I'm a god. Wow. He went from sitting, he would get up, he would look at his throne, and from his throne room he could look out over all of his kingdom. And his kingdom went further than he could ever see. I mean, his kingdom was massive. As far as the eye could see, he was in charge of it all. And he had money that you can't begin to imagine the amount of wealth this man had. He makes people today, he makes our billionaires look like paupers, the kind of money this man had. I mean, he had nations of wealth. Our people, we got what, billionaires? This man owned everything. He's like a trillionaire. How do you compete with that? You can't. And so you go from that, sitting on a golden throne, to eating grass out there in a field because you thought you were higher than you were. Pride can lead to a fall. Beware where you walk, lest you fall. Paul warned us all the time. Hey, you know, if you are always walking like this, there's a good chance you're going to trip and fall. Right? If you walk with your nose in the air, you're going to stumble over something. So keep your eyes firmly planted on your path. Chances are, if you walk a little more humble, instead of like this, walk like this, chances are you won't fall. Chances. So those are the things that we learn from Nebuchadnezzar. Let's pray.